You're seeing on the news and on social media all these illegal migrants, millions of them, pouring across the southern border of Texas. And what if I told you that what I've shown you so far is only the tip of the iceberg? What if the government is actually hiding something from you, which would be rare? And what if I told you that these migrants weren't being put on buses and planes and flown to different parts of the US cities where they can live a peaceful life in order to vote Democrat? That's what you may think. What if I told you that these migrants are being allowed in without being vaccinated and are being bused to what we call DUMBs, deep underground military bases, never to be seen again? Would you believe me? Or would you believe the government that insists that these migrants are coming in and they're being bused and planed to cities across the US in order to have a nice life? What I've shown you before is just the tip of the iceberg. And what if I told you that humans were not on the top of the food chain, but rather somebody else is on top? And what's the reason for these migrants being transported down deep into these underground bases? And why are the children being left alone without any parents in sight? You've all heard by now the word adrenochrome, and what they do, what the elites do to these small kids, babies. They terrify them. And the children, in return, produce inside their bodies what's called a drug, adrenochrome. And I know a lot of you aren't believing this, but as I told you, what I've shown you before is just the tip of the iceberg. This adrenochrome is the elite's drug of choice. It gives them strength, power, gets rid of the wrinkles, makes them look young again, strong again. And that's going throughout Hollywood. It's going throughout government, all these politicians in power. And you don't believe it. They're not telling you the truth. I am. So if we're not at the top of the food chain, as I mentioned earlier, then who is? And why do they call all these migrants crossing the Texas border the meat wagon? Before you go to bed tonight, be sure to check under your bed. You may be surprised to find out for yourself who is at the top of the food chain. I want you to listen to this next story coming up and decide for yourself who's telling the truth.
What is their worry outside of them?
There have been, forbidden truths, we can call them, if you will. There have been forbidden truths in the history of not just our country, but many countries. Truths that could upset a balance that's been around for a long time.
Well, in the United States, where I now live, the definition of top secret information is information the release of which would cause catastrophic damage to the national interests of the United States. And you've got to say, what could there be? For years, people forget, for years, the American government told people, we're not even interested in this. Nobody's investigating. And now it's like a 180-degree turn. And they say, yeah, we've got top secret information on UFOs. So like you say,
this topic's really scary. It's like, UFOs, oh wow, there's these things in the sky. Well, it's much bigger than that. It's much, 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 much bigger. What happened is when we found out what was going on after World War II, kind of during World War II, it scared the hell out of everybody involved. And so what they did was they said, we got to figure out what this subject is, what this topic is. We got to figure out what it is, who it is, what they're doing, all that kind of stuff. And we need to do it in crazy secrecy because this is really, really, really advanced stuff.
And what was the really, really advanced stuff?
Well, the machinery,
which is what?
The crafts itself.
Aircrafts.
Well, they're not even really air. They're transmedium.
It's this point right here where everybody goes, Tom's crazy.
Yeah, well.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Not me.
Well,
I'm just saying it feels like.
hanging on every word.
Oh, like I have no idea.
Well, let me explain
Okay.
why it's the tinfoil hat thing. Is so what they did is the government slipped operatives, over decades into these UFO groups and into the news and just made everyone think it was dumb. But it was for good reason, because they didn't want people to understand it was real. They didn't want people freaking out. They didn't want Congress freaking out. And eventually what that would have done is exposed what they were trying to do, which was really a crash course on understanding what this was.
What the hell was it?
So just keep everyone thinking it's stupid. That way it doesn't boil up before they're ready to talk.
Do we have an alien ship of some type?
Oh, I no comment on that.
What do you know, Tom?
When you really find out what's going on and what's happening on Earth, it's very depressing, and it totally fits with biblical prophecy, because it appears that both gray aliens and reptilians are feeding on human bodies. That's one of the things that you learn. We need to get rid of these human traffickers. We need to get these aliens out of here, because they are demons. And it's worse than you think. It's a lot worse than you think. What's going on with the border? Most of those people are not going to become American citizens. That's what they call a meat wagon. And I heard about meat wagons all the way back in 2010, that they let people through the border, they put them on a bus, they drive them into an underground base, and whatever happens from there.
Imagine everything you've been taught, whether it's through Sunday school or through regular formal education in school, or what our political leaders have told us. And yes, even maybe our mothers and fathers around the dinner table have told us, or maybe at bedtime, about who we are, right? And our background and our past. What if all of that turned out to be not entirely accurate? In fact, the very history of our species, the meaning, what it means to be a human being and our place in this universe. What if all that is now in question? What if it turns out that a lot of the things that we thought were one way aren't? Are we prepared to have that honest question with ourselves? Are we prepared to to recognize that we're not at the top of the food chain, potentially, that we're not the alpha predator, that we are maybe somewhere in the middle. What if it turns out that there's another species that is even higher on that ladder than we are? Do we need the social institutions that we have today? Will we need governmental and religious organizations that we have today if it turns out that there is something else or someone else that is technologically more advanced? There's going to come a point in this conversation where we're going to have to do a lot of reconciling with ourselves, whatever that means, from whatever philosophical background you have. This is going to impact every single one of us the same and yet equally and yet differently. And I think that's important. Do we find ourselves in a situation where history may have to be rewritten?